Welcome to the Generation Elevation podcast, a conscious, connected platform for those who are ready to manifest their dream life. I'm your host, Elise Riley, a former PT, now motivational speaker, igniting empowerment and transformation all across the globe. Here at Generation Elevation, we are committed to bringing you the most inspiring guests who will share their stories, wisdom, and advice to help you progress closer to living a life of your own terms. Hello, welcome back to another episode of Generation Elevation. Today, I am here joined by a special guest, and I cannot wait to share with you a little bit the story of how we've met and how we've evolved to here. However, this beautiful woman, she is known for being an interior designer for human beings. She helps people move past unresourceful programs, helping them fall in love with life. That sounds so good. So with that said, I would like to welcome you, Ashleigh.
Thank you. Thanks
Hello.
for having me.
How are you today?
Really good. Really good. It's a beautiful day on the Goldie. Happy to be up here.
It is. It's so beautiful. And so for my listeners, just a couple of quick questions because some of them may not know specifically who you are. So how old are you? Where are you from originally? Have you always been on the Gold Coast? What do you do? So interior designer for the mind. So tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so I'm 36, originally from Sydney. I moved up to Byron Bay a couple of years ago, kind of mid-pandemic time, and spent a little bit of time there, just over a year before moving up here to the Goldie. So it's been a beautiful, beautiful shift in lifestyle, and yeah, absolutely love it. So wow, where do I start with my job and my role? Do you want the whole superhero origin story?
Yeah, I would love to hear a little bit more into like how you specifically got into what you do, and potentially along the way, even just those three major moments for you that shifted you to who you are today.
Yeah, it's kind of an interesting question because whenever I reflect back on this, it kind of started from the moment I was 5 years old when that initial core wound started to appear, which was the wound around achievement and my self-worth, being defined by what I could achieve and how I could prove myself in the world, and everything kind of started to take shape from there. So I was a child gymnast.
Wow.
And I was quite a good little child gymnast too, which sounds amazing, but also carries a massive burden. So since that age, I'd always had a certain level of perfectionism, and I just placed an immense amount of pressure on myself to uphold a very, very high standard of what other people expected me to do and be. And obviously being a very physical sport and a sport of perfection, a lot of my worth and a lot of my identity was formed around my body, my physical appearance. And then when I stopped gymnastics, when I hit my teens and my, puberty started to occur, I really, so to speak, lost control of my body. I gained weight, the normal stuff that we go through when we're teenagers, and which led to eating disorders, which is something that I really struggled with and was challenged with for up to about 15 years.
Wow.
Yeah, it was a really long journey, and one that I held a lot of shame around, one that absorbed a great deal of my life, and there was a lot of pain associated with that. And I was really good at hiding it too, so a lot of the times when I was my sickest, I was actually looked my healthiest on the outside, which I think is something that we all really need to understand. Is our perception of eating disorders is somebody who looks like really thin and sickly thin, but it's such a pervasive problem because often it goes unnoticed, and often the people who are struggling the most are really good at hiding it, and I was brilliant at hiding it. So something I really held on to for a very long time, and then I found my way into the fitness industry as a personal trainer. I'd been working in advertising and a few other kind of random jobs that never really felt right, and it was wonderful. It was this beautiful way that I could be back in my body again and reconnect with my body, and I'd always been quite athletic and quite sporty, so that was really exciting. But because I hadn't really done the deep work to heal all those issues, it kind of became a way that I could channel, I guess, all that distortion and all that disconnection into my training. So it again was just another method for me to control my body, or for me to, you know, identify myself with things that were not internal or not inherently who I am. So again, from the outside, everything looked great. I was killing it. You know, had this, I went from wanting to be super skinny to now just wanting to be really muscly and super skinny. So there was a whole other level of that. And yeah, I was quite successful, and I was really good at what I did, and I absolutely loved working with my clients, but there was that deep knowing that I was also projecting a lot of my wounds onto them, and everything that I was saying I wasn't really integrating. And even through the way that I was coaching, I was still pushing my paradigms of what I believed was good for other people onto them. And still to this day, when I think about it, it brings up a lot of emotion and a lot of guilt and a lot of sadness for the women that I potentially could have done harm to in that time. And that's something I think about a lot.
That's really big and huge of you to even just like say that.
Yeah. Well, it was a big thing that I had to process, is that being part of my journey, but then also understanding that them interacting with me was part of their journey as well. So we were all playing roles in each other's lives, and it's not good or bad, it just is. And to understand that, that was my role, and I was a catalyst for some form of change in their life. Probably not the change that I was really hoping it was, but who knows, maybe on some level it was. Yeah. And it was at this time I was still doing, you know, fitness online stuff, mainly online, nutrition and training. And I hit my Saturn's return, which if you know much about that.
Tell me more.
Saturn return is like a planetary thing that happens, and our first Saturn return occurs around ages, usually around 29. It can span up to about 33. Okay. And it is a time when we form, it kind of coincides with, I don't know if you know Carl Jung, we're getting a little bit deep.
I do,
so,
yes,
Carl,
I love it.
Love Carl Jung. So Carl Jung developed the concept of the shadow, the human shadow, the ego and the shadow. So generally our shadow starts to appear around the same time as Saturn return. And so because by the age of about 29, or that first 29 years of our life up to age 30, we're kind of forming our identity. We're really figuring out who we are. And when we figure out who we are, we also figure out, or we decide who we are not. And then that becomes our shadow, right? So what ends up happening around this age of, 29, 30, it's like it's culturally and societally like a big kind of pivot moment. We feel like we're becoming an adult now, but psychologically and also, cosmically, so to speak, where also our shadow starts to form. And when that happens, we start to feel a lot of disruption, a lot of questions. It's almost like we kind of split into two. We find our identity and we find our not self, and there can be a lot of upheaval of beliefs and a lot of questioning of who am I and what am I here to do. So it can, when someone's in their Saturn return, when they've just got a lot of shit going on in their life, it seems chaotic and they're questioning everything, and life changes in a big way, and you start to really question stuff. So I had this massive Saturn's return and just started really realizing that I needed to sort my shit out. I'd been suppressing all this stuff and pretending that I was okay, still on and off with my eating disorder kind of, but at this point I was relapsing here and there, and I hadn't really quite got there. So I ended up in Peru in the jungle.
I love where this is going. So cool.
My first ever plant medicine experience, my first ever ayahuasca retreat. My brother had been a year earlier. I had never heard about it. Nobody was talking about it this time. And when he told me the year before, I was completely uninterested. I'm like, well, that's a bit weird. Okay. Not for me. And then almost a year later, almost in like right on the crescendo of my Saturn's return, I was like, I've just got to go to the jungle. I can't even explain it. So get on a plane and crying at the airport, terrified, and ended up having one of the most powerful, I guess, experiences of my life, really seeing myself for the first time.
Wow. The
shadows, the projections, the wounds, but then also my true self, my core, my heart, my soul, and I never connected with that part of myself. And it was amazingly eye-opening, but also terrifying, because I knew I had to come home and everything I was doing needed to change. I could not teach the things that I was teaching. I couldn't continue to work in the way I was, and because I had formed such an identity around this online persona, this fat loss coach and this really inspirational, really fit, really ripped chick. I was like, who am I if not that, and what does that mean moving forward? And I'd also been in a long-term relationship that we were about to get married, that I came home and broke up with him, and all the things, the chaos. Yeah, it was massive, but that kind of set the trajectory for where I am now, is the level of awareness that I was able to experience in like such a short period of time, and the things that I saw and that I couldn't unsee. Yeah. It was scary and it was very destabilizing, obviously, but I knew it felt so right. So came home, completely flipped my business inside out, stopped working with dieting and kind of pushing that kind of narrative and pushing that ideal and paradigm, and started working with healing relationship with food and healing women's relationship with their body. And so I studied the psychology of eating, which was really wonderful. Learned so much around why we eat the way we eat and why we feel the way that we feel about ourselves, and you know, the many different factors that contribute to someone's sense of self and self-esteem and body image. And that was really transformational on a personal level, but yeah, obviously professionally as well. Yeah. And then I guess the next evolution, the million times that this has happened, as you know, was really even moving one step deeper inside. And I no longer so much work with the body and nutrition anymore, and it's just all the internal work. So once you realize that all that stuff, the way that we eat, the way that we view ourselves, the way that we move, the way that we relate to our body is literally just manifestation of internal world, then once you start working with that, that's when everything shifts. And I guess that was realizing that was my big shift, meant that I was like, okay, I can create this change for other people. They don't have to work from the outside in to try and find that sense of peace and that sense of self. They can just start from the inside out, and everything will transform as a result. So yeah, that's kind of been the trajectory. That's where I'm at right now, is working one-on-one, like privately with women, and also I host and lead group programs that are all based around the various aspects of connecting to your authentic self and reprogramming all the subconscious and unconscious belief systems that keep us trapped in, you know, suffering and unhappiness, and just help people just get back into their lives and fall in love with it. And it's been a pretty wild ride. Wow.
It usually is, especially when you're in the mindset game and you're teaching people about the subconscious and unconscious mind, right? Obviously, to be able to teach that, you need to go on an individual self journey as well. So, there's so many things that I want to touch on within that. So, what was it like for you? Obviously, you had this identity of this fitness coach, and then going back from your Aya journey to then completely changing everything about not just your social media, but like your relationship. And what was that like at the time? Because I know there'll be so many people listening to this resonating or potentially going through something like this right now. So I guess maybe what was that like for you, and also maybe some advice for people that are listening?
Yeah, I mean, it was scary, and I would never take that away from people. I'm not going to say that, you know, it wasn't incredibly destabilizing for my life, and I really had to dig deep and really anchor into that sense of the very awareness that I'm having that this doesn't feel right means that it's not, and I need to really, really trust that. So everything we cling to as part of our identity, if we're sensing that fear surrounding it, it generally means that it's not really aligned with us. If there's any
attachment.
Attachment, it's usually because that's a fear-based thing. And sometimes you really have to lose yourself to find yourself, and sometimes you have to be willing to let it all go and know that, you know, it is going to be okay. It is going to be okay. And what I will say is that at that time as well, I was studying NLP, which was good. So I was getting so many tools and so many resources.
How good's NLP?
So good. And also, like, I did a decent amount of somatic work as well. So learning how to work with my nervous system and the physical body as a way to process what was coming up. So I was resourcing myself whilst making this transition, which is probably the biggest piece of advice I would give someone who's maybe going through an identity crisis, or just realizing that their life maybe isn't aligned. And that feeling is a feeling in the body, you know, it's something that you sense, and you have to trust that, but ensure that you're providing yourself with the safety to transition as well, because we're all wired for safety, and if it doesn't feel like we have the ability to carry ourselves through the process, we won't do it, and we'll try, and then we'll get wobbly and we'll go backwards, and then we'll convince ourselves that it's not safe. So yeah, it would be to align yourself, work with a coach or a therapist or somebody who is skilled in being able to resource you and teach you what you need to learn in order to be able to hold yourself through that process as well.
Yeah.
Because it is wobbly and, you know, we're all wanting to stay in our safe little comfort zone and not change and just do the same old shit we've all been doing. So, yeah, having the confidence of knowing that you have tools available is massive, absolutely massive.
Yeah. And even while you were speaking as well, I love that you mentioned plant medicine because you're probably the first guest that I've had on that's mentioned it. Yeah, I'm like, I've been waiting. It's great. So we'll definitely, I think we should delve into that a little bit later. However, your story, as I'm listening, I'm like, wow, I see just so much resonance in my own story with yours, especially coming from like the PT nutrition space and then delving deep into hypnosis, NLP, like past life regression and helping people with their subconscious beliefs and programming. It's like completely like opposite and letting go of that identity of who and how I must be and act and look as well in order to feel worthy. Like I definitely in the past had this attachment to the way I looked and being shredded and if I was shredded then I was worthy and deserving of love and all of these other things. And so I guess I'd love to go into, especially I know there'd be people listening to this right now who may actually struggle with body confidence and may, like my younger self, also attach this idea of like what you look like is what you deserve, and when you are looking a certain way then it's like you're only worthy at that point. So I guess what would be like your biggest tips for people out there that are struggling with body confidence and wanting to love themselves more and work from the inside out, but they're just like not really sure how to do that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, massive compassion to everyone, especially women, because this has been what has been thrown in our face since we were little girls. Like my mum was eating Special K and she wasn't allowed to eat what we were eating at dinner. You know, we were all growing up around this stuff, around the era of diet foods. So, you know, collectively we're all suffering and we're all trying to recover from that. So we all need to give ourselves a huge big hug and a lot of love and compassion if we're still struggling with that. And, you know, at the age of 36 with my history, there's still times where I'm like, oh, I feel disgusting, you know, and I want to criticize myself and, you know, I have to come back to that place of love. But I think the most crucial thing to understand, and this is what clicked for me, is that if love and acceptance is conditional on me looking a certain way, that is not love and acceptance, because love and acceptance is as who you are. So it will, if you are pursuing love and acceptance through that way, you are never going to feel like you can really receive it, because you will kind of know, or you'll never know if this person loves or accepts you because they've not seen who you really are. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's like when we're taking these superficial means to gain it, we're also gaining superficial love and acceptance.
Yes.
It's not real. So you're not going to feel it in your heart. You're not going to feel it in your soul. And you're not going to ever feel comfortable, because now you have to maintain that body or that image or whatever it is in order to maintain
all that social media following. Like
it's a trap. It's a trap. And so even if you do believe that when you have that body or when you have that boyfriend or that career that everything's going to be amazing, I'm going to tell you it's absolutely not true, because now you have the pressure of maintaining something that maybe doesn't feel right for you for the sake of trying to gain superficial love and acceptance. And the moment that you let go of that and you do that, you know, there's no kind of quick tips to fall in love with yourself. It is a process and a journey, and it can take months, years, lifetimes. You know, the moment you let go of that desire to look or be a certain way, that's when you start magnetizing people who really see you for who you are, and you start to really receive that love and acceptance, because you're not in self-rejection. And you can't gain genuine love from the outside world if you're rejecting yourself in the process of trying to gain it.
100%. I always say to my clients, like, life is your mirror.
Totally.
Right? Like what's going on internally is going to be reflected back to you externally. So like if you're meeting people and, you know, you're in these toxic relationships or you're getting all these red flags, like start to look inwards.
Totally. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. You want someone to love you for you, like you love you for you first. Like stop waiting for that to come from the outside, because that person that meets you is only going to ever be a reflection of your lack as well. And they're going to show that to you. And but I think that's the thing, is everyone's looking for the quick path there, and depending on, you know, your life and your story and your wounding and what you've experienced, it can be a process, and it's not straight line. It can be back and forth and up and down, you know, and I think to just release the pressure of how that looks as well, and just day by day just do ask yourself, like, what would someone who loves themselves do? That's a question I always ask myself in this situation. What would someone who really loves themselves do? And I would sometimes ask that, like, when I was healing my relationship with food and my body, I'd be like, what would someone who loves themselves eat right now? And sometimes that's a bowl of ice cream and sometimes that's a salad. But the answer would always come to me authentically because I'm asking it through the lens of love, not what should I eat? What's the right thing to eat? You know, it's if I loved myself, what would the choice be in this moment? And it's a really beautiful question, I think, to always ask.
I'm like, I'm not interrupting you. I'm like, wow, that is so powerful. 100%. I love that question.
Yeah.
And even saying what you said before, like when you're in that mindset of like should and shouldn't and right and wrong, like that's where we get so stressed and in that sympathetic nervous system, right? And like how you said before in your story, there really is no right or wrong. There just is.
Yeah.
And so it's like, how can you step into authentically you and flow with like the inspiration rather than like I get to energy or like I have to rather than I get to. Yeah, which is so, so cool.
Yeah.
So powerful. And so I'm curious to know, because the way I met you, I was just explaining this before we pressed record. As I started my journey in nutrition and fitness, and then I went completely into the personal development journey, and the catalyst was more so like COVID and then a breakup as well.
Yeah.
So for me, I was learning a lot about like the mind and why we do certain things that we do, why we eat the certain way that we eat. And for me, I had a friend actually recommend your page. And so this was when I was way back living in Melbourne. Yeah. So I'm looking at your page, I'm like, yes, this is literally like so in resonance with what I believe and what I want to teach other people as well. And it's so funny how the universe works, right? Because like a year later, I'm on the Gold Coast, I'm training at World's Gym, and then here you are, I've bumped into you a couple of times. I'm like, okay, today's the day I'm going to ask Ashleigh to be on my podcast. And here you are, like how cool. Like, you know, I really believe that your vibe attracts your tribe. And for me, like I had so much imposter syndrome, like coming up here and not thinking that I was going to be able to do this, or that I would like, that I wasn't good enough to interview someone like yourself, right?
That's
and so
crazy.
I know. And so now it's like, it's almost really cool for me to reflect on my personal growth and my journey to be like, actually, you know what, like, fuck yeah, like we're here sitting and it's really cool just like someone that inspired me in my journey to be sitting with you and like now you leveraging my platform to share your story. I think it's really, really powerful. So like we were saying before, we recorded as well, like the power of collaboration, like when people come together that have a similar message, like it's unstoppable.
Yeah, exactly. And like I said, that's one of my highest values coming into this year is collaboration. And I realize so much suffering, especially amongst women, is from competition, comparison, hierarchical structures, very masculine, which is, you know, beautiful in many ways. But our core energy is to share, to love, to collaborate, to communicate. So it does feel so good and nourishing for everybody when we do that. You know, sharing resources is so beautiful. It's interesting when you're just touching on how you have those moments where like, oh, I can't believe that, you know, I get to do this and who am I to do that? Like I still have those moments all the time when, you know, someone comes up to me like yourself in the gym and we have a chat or someone recognizes me and like I don't have a massive following and I'm like, you know, it's never really been a big thing of mine to want to have a huge profile, but I'm still struck by that when I've impacted someone's life or even a client. You know, last night we had our final call that we've been working together. She was crying and saying how much I've changed her life. And I'm like, it's still really wild for me to understand the impact that we're all having. And, you know, that never leaves. And I think that's a good thing sometimes. It kind of humbles us and it makes us really realize that we are so powerful, but we're also so humble and so also still dealing with our own worthiness stuff at the same time, and it can be really hard to see the power that we have until it's reflected back to us and we get to really acknowledge it. So it's really lovely when that happens, and I appreciate you for extending this invitation and even coming and chatting with me because it really kind of stokes that fire in me to go, okay, keep doing what you're doing. You're doing good. You're okay, you know?
Yes, 100%. I went and did my first aid the other day and I was doing it with this guy named Jared. Shout out to Jared. He's a legend. And we're chatting and talking about his energy and how he's starting his first aid business. So it's just like kind of like a couple of hundred followers, right? And I explained to him, I'm like, well, bro, like at the end of the day, no one's going to remember how many followers you have. No. It's the energy that you like show up in. And so, like, I'm not going to care about your following count, but the way you make me feel in our interaction, that is what I will remember forever.
Yeah.
Like, I'm sure, like, in conversation sometimes I'll remember back to a moment or, like, an experience that I had with some random that, like, fully made my day. I'll remember that over, like, someone that was boring and then, like, their following count was big. Like,
totally.
It doesn't matter. It's more so just, like, what keeps me going is, like, if I can help one person, then that's all that matters. If one person listens to this podcast, I have won. Like, I'm a winner.
Totally.
And, like, that, going with that belief, I guess the way listeners can apply that would be, like, if you're listening to us right now and seeing, like, what we're doing and being like, wow, like, I want to do that too. It's like, well, we're just reflecting back to you what you can do and what you are capable of as 100%. Well. And on that too, you did mention, like, competition, comparison. So I've done an episode on how I overcome, like, comparison, especially with other women in the gym. But I'd love to hear your perspective on how you overcame, like, that.
Yeah. It's certainly been a massive journey for me as a child gymnast. My best friends were also my enemies, you know. So there's always been this weird thing with women and competition for me. It's actually, I've had a couple of shitty relationships, don't get me wrong, but men has never been my problem. It's always been my relationship to women and how accepted I feel, or, you know, this sense of scarcity and sister wounds has been a big thing for me to work through. That's been a lifelong journey. And I think, you know, I always come back to this thing, if there's ever a sense of me comparing or jealousy or envy, that's, again, positive projection. I'm only seeing in that woman something that is my potential or something that I'm yet to actually realize within myself and develop. So, and the moment you realize that nobody's in competition with each other, because and it sounds so cheesy, we are all so unique. Like, there is absolutely nobody who has the unique qualities and the combination of the unique qualities that we all have. So there's no such thing as competition, really. It's like only if you're viewing it that way. So I really had to, you know, work really hard to decondition the programming that I had, that women are, even if they're my friends, they're my enemies, you know. That's a big one. But yeah, the moment I just started to see where those uncomfortable feelings were coming up within me and how I could choose to, I guess, utilize them to see what this person was reflecting back to me, or even just see where I needed to be more gentle with myself, or kind of disidentify from that inner critic that was protectively presenting me with that emotion or that thought as a way to create separation and protect myself. So yeah, just always coming back to self and always coming back to, like, what's coming up for me in this moment? What do I need? What is this person reflecting back to me, and what do I need to hear?
Yeah.
Or what would little Ashleigh need to hear in this moment? What would that little inner child that's feeling activated right now, that doesn't feel good enough, what does she need to know? And how can I provide that for myself? Yeah.
What would, like, on that as well, what would be your advice to your younger self going through, like, maybe, like, even before that first Saturn return, when you're going through those, like, dark phases, like, what would be your advice to her?
Yeah, I always think about this because, I was in such a state of unconsciousness back then. I was partying like an animal ever since I was like 18 to, you know, late 20s.
Yeah.
I was like really into that shit. I think I've just always loved altered states of consciousness, hence the, you know, psychedelic kind of exploration. But I think it would just be to not take everything so seriously, and to literally just be in my life more and less in my head. Like, I would always been someone who hyperanalyzes things, creates stories, really, like, goes hard, and I was very critical of myself at all times. But I think it was just more to just enjoy my life and not take it so seriously, understand that everything's going to be okay. And I wish, you know, there's a part of me that wish I started this journey much earlier, because I'm like, wow, where would I be right now? Like, who knows? But I mean, I had to kind of go through all that to really get to that point and have all the lessons from that period of my life as well. So it's really hard to give advice, because I actually don't want anything to change. Because had I had a different mindset, or if I saw things differently, then I wouldn't be at the level of awareness I am at now, and also not have as much compassion and understanding and empathy, because I've been through all those experiences. So it's one of those things that people ask me, like, what would you change, or what advice would you give? And I'm like, I probably wouldn't give any advice, because I needed to have that experience. Like, keep going. Yeah.
You're doing great.
Yeah, just maybe a bit of encouragement of, like, you're fine. Like, there's nothing wrong with you.
Yeah.
You're all good, and it's going to work out perfectly. But yeah, I guess that would be it.
And I'm getting the vibe that you would probably resonate with this belief that I have. So I believe that essentially, like, when we come here to Earth, that we actually choose, like, we have choose major events that happen for us. So the things that happen to us happen for us. That is my belief. And that along this journey, like, it couldn't have happened earlier for you because that was part of your soul's evolution and growth.
100%.
Yeah. And so for you, like, when I say that the major events that have shaped you to who you are, like, do you believe that you kind of chose that in a way on a soul level?
Absolutely. And I think my spiritual path was what really liberated me from my eating disorder, because I was very much in the clinical route. Nothing was working, and not that I don't believe in, you know, that kind of stuff, Western medicine and traditional therapy and all that kind of stuff. Everything has its place. But
it's like an integration of it all, right?
Yeah. For me to really get some spiritual altitude and understand that this is my karma in this lifetime, this is my challenge to overcome, this is my access route to self-love. So I think that we're all placed on this earth and given our own specific path to find our way back to ourselves. So, we're fractured at some point, the wounds are created, and then we all kind of have our own specific route to find our way back to that sense of pure love, pure wholeness that we came into the world with. And mine was my eating disorder. I had to separate from self through that and find my way back through that. And to really understand that that was a crucial part of my story and it had to happen also meant that now I had a bit of a purpose moving forward. So my karma became my Dharma. The thing I was here to heal then became the thing I was here to help heal in others. Yeah. And help to, that was my imprint on the world, and the way that I was going to make my mark and the contribution that I was going to leave behind is to transform and transmute all that suffering and all that pain into something beautiful that I could pass on, and the lessons and that pure empathy of knowing exactly how it feels to really, really dislike yourself, and also give the hope that there is a way to completely find your way home again.
Wow. Yes. And that resonates with a post that I just put up as well not long ago about being the lighthouse.
Yeah.
Like, when you light it up and shine your light and you speak your truth and your journey, right? That's when your people will find you, and your people, like, I mean, your friends, your relationships, your intimate relationships, and also your people that you're going to lead and to empower, and not necessarily like a hierarchy level of leadership. It's like a collaboration leadership. And by you sharing your story, even here on my podcast today, it's like allowing, like, I'm getting goosebumps, allowing your light to shine so other people can then see, oh, you know what, there is actually hope in all of this darkness that they might be experiencing as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was one of the biggest things that shifted for me, especially on social media, is when I stopped trying to be the authority and be the inspiration all the time and just started being really honest. And I share a lot of my life on there, like I do, and sometimes I'm like, is this like a bit too much? Like, but it's really cathartic for me because it's a way of processing, but also creating that connection with others, like sharing the mutual stuff that we're all experiencing and going through, and just allowing people to feel okay about where they're at in life as well, and what they're going through, and that there are other people, and there are also solutions and answers and tools and resources. And it's been a big experience for me, and I no longer have this fear of being exposed. I used to have this huge imposter syndrome all the time of like, it was just like this gnawing feeling of somebody figuring out that I'm not good. But because when you put everything out there, like, and you're just like, this is the shit I do that I'm not proud of, or, this is going on and I'm finding it really hard. Like, you don't have that anymore. I'm no longer afraid that someone's going to find anything out, because I literally put it on there all the time. And I remove the shame for myself. So it's a really healing experience when we can show up in authenticity and honesty. And that's not to say that, anyone's obligated to share their entire life. Like, I don't put intimate details of my relationship on there all the time. Course, if something big happens, I usually do share. But, you don't want to get into the place of, I guess, oversharing, because that is sometimes a way that we are, I guess, coming from a wounded place as well, of just like desperately wanting to be seen, not from an authentic place, more from, that wound. But, I think just showing up in authenticity, honesty, rawness, talking about the things that people don't want to talk about or that they generally hide from has been like really powerful for me, not just personally, but also for my business and my work, obviously. Because I attract people who are really drawn to that that authentic part of me and that human part of me as well.
Yeah, it establishes like a really deep trust as well when you are showing up fully as you. Like even when you were talking before about social media and like having to show up in a certain way from this wounded space, like there's so many people I see on social media that are showing up in that space. And it's like when you meet them in person, it's like completely different, you know?
Exactly.
And so I'm a huge believer in that integrity piece. Like I think that is so important, especially if you're coaching people with their mindset and especially 100%. Like reprogramming and bringing them back to that sparkly diamond, like returning them back to self, you know? I think that integrity is such a huge piece that some people in the industry miss, and then also some people do it really well. So like even following you, it's like really cool to see you fully step into like that integrity and just share authentically you, because it inspires me to do that too. It's like the lighthouse thing, right? You know?
And that has been a big thing for me recently as well, because I feel like there's certain types of authenticity that are more accepted than others, and I've had to really deepen my integrity around stuff that I was like not liking, that I was seeing, and stuff that I could be potentially judged as being a bitch or putting other women down and all this kind of thing. But for me, it was like, I actually have to talk about this. And if I'm holding back on this as well, things that are, you know, quite big for me, or things that I'm really witnessing that I'm talking about behind the scenes, it was really big for me to bring forward that level of authenticity, because, you know, I've been vulnerable in my struggles and in my heartache and in all that kind of stuff. And that's like a real nice soft version of authenticity that people are like, oh, but to bring forward this, you know, this other part was really challenging for me, because I knew, and I knew I'd be judged for it, and I knew I would be called low vibe or whatever that is, you know, or negative. But that's also part of me. I'm high vibe sometimes, but I'm also negative sometimes, as we all are.
Yeah, as a human.
Yeah, hello. So to really actually step into that next level of like, I'm also going to talk about this stuff as well, and be judged for it and be criticized for being that way, but it's my truth. So and that created even more magnetism, which is what happens. And this is what people don't understand, is like, you'll only ever be loved to the degree that you're willing to be disliked. So if you want to play in that little middle ground and be loved by everyone, then or be liked by everyone, you're never going to be loved. And you might not be disliked, you might not get criticized, but you're not going to be like really loved, and you're not going to be really magnetic. So that's the polarity of life. You've got to be willing to be disliked if you really want to be seen and loved.
And I think like, especially social media as well, the people that are triggered by your post, like you're just reflecting back to them something that they haven't processed within themselves, right?
And that's not my person. Like I don't like everyone. I don't pretend that I do. So if someone doesn't like me, that's so fine. So fine. Just don't come and tell me on my page. Like, just leave through the back door, please. No, it's fine. It's fine. I'm okay with the criticism thing. And that was another level that I had to unlock, was, you know, the more we step into ourselves and the more attention we get, the more criticism we get as well. And that's always been something I've really felt challenged with, is that wound of rejection and the wound of judgment. But learning to just hold that and be okay with it, and not make it, you know, always somebody else's projection. Sometimes, you know, I am being an asshole. Sometimes I have done something wrong, and to not immediately deflect back and be like, well, that's just you. Because sometimes it is. But when we're seeing projections and shadows, like if someone's projecting onto me, it's not that I'm not doing it. It's just that they're seeing themselves through me. Yeah. So it doesn't mean that I'm completely void of responsibility for what they're seeing. It's just like they're seeing themselves, but I can still be the asshole as well. So I think that's what happens with projection, and when people don't really understand this concept, is it's a great, like, actually my friend Mitch, bless him, we love Mitch. He was actually with me on the weekend at another plant medicine ceremony. Hi Mitch. And we studied NLP together, and we learnt about projection, and we would just be like, this is awesome. So it's like, you get out of jail free card. Anytime someone, you know, wants to insult you or give you negative feedback, you can just go, well, that's a projection, and you don't have to take it on. I was like, this is unreal. But and I think that's how people use that, is they really think that like they can deflect any feedback as being a projection, but it's possibly true as well as a projection. And so we also need to have the humility to be able to accept that and know that, yes, maybe they're projecting, that they're probably right as well. There's probably some truth in it, and can I sit with that, and can I be okay with that? Can I be okay with that shadow that they're seeing in me without pushing it further into the shadow by going, that's not mine?
As well, like, I would like to touch on this shadow.
Yeah.
Right? Because I know some of my listeners will know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah.
And probably some of your following will come on and listen to this show too. So they might be like, oh, yes, I know what Ashleigh's talking about. But there also will be people listening being like, what the heck is this shadow thing?
What is it?
What is this light? What is this shadow?
Yeah.
So, if you could explain
Okay.
just like in a basic...
Yeah. Okay. So I'll give you the synopsis, the basis of it.
Yeah.
So this is a Carl Jung theory, who you know about. Carl Jung was a psychotherapist, was he a psychologist from way back when?
Yeah.
Wonderful guy. So he developed the concept of the shadow and the human consciousness. So there is 3 kind of aspects to our consciousness. We have our higher consciousness, which is like the whole part of us, the higher self, so to speak, that one that we talk about all the time. Then we have our ego, which is our identity. So when I spoke earlier about us forming our identity, everything that we associate with and the outside persona that the world sees is what's known as our ego. When we hear the word ego, we think, oh, bad, but it's not bad. It's not necessarily bad. It just forms everything that we identify with as being me, Ashleigh, at least.
Yeah.
And so then when we start to form our ego and we start to form who we are, we then start to form our shadow, because our ego usually attaches to the aspects that were positively reinforced growing up, which formed our identity. So I was taught about who to be through the positive reinforcement that I got as a kid. What I was told was good and bad. The things that I told were bad get pushed into my shadow, the things that I disidentify with, so they can be good as well as bad, but the things that I don't feel like a part of me form part of my shadow. But the truth is, we are everything. So if I'm good, I'm also bad. If I'm kind, I'm also mean. If I'm generous, I'm also a stingy bitch. I am both things. We are all both things, except the things that we want to, or the things that we identify with, we will push into our ego, our identity, and all the things that we don't get pushed into our shadow self. So then what happens is, because our higher consciousness is really there to create wholeness and integration, and it wants us to love ourselves, and it wants us to love all of ourselves. So if I'm only loving the good side of Ashleigh, then I'm not loving the bad. Therefore, I'm not really loving myself. I'm loving one aspect. So what the higher consciousness does is shows us those shadow aspects through other people as a way for us to create integration, to see it, and to create wholeness. So when we're getting triggered by other people, or when somebody's getting under our skin, or when we're projecting, so to speak, what we're actually doing is projecting that shadow aspect that we disidentify with onto that other person for us to see it and for us to integrate and love it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So that higher consciousness is doing that. It's showing us that thing that we've denied, that thing that we're like, I am not that, in somebody else, for us to accept it. And like I said, this can happen positively or negatively. And I'll give you an example of a positive one. So negative ones are really easy. You know what I mean? You'll see someone who's doing something really triggering. So, I'll give you a positive one first. The negative ones are super easy.
Perfect.
But yeah. So, for instance, there's this chick, and I used to work at Fitness First Bondi Platinum back in the day. And there was this girl, and she was like on social media, and she was like a typical kind of influencer, not really a fitness one, but more, I guess, of, the traditional, well, just, the ones where they're just like lots of brands and stuff. Like, not specific to anything, but just, I think she had a decent following, but she would walk around, and I'm going to speak in the language that I would use back then. So know that this is not how I feel now. I just want to preface that, but I'm just going to jump into the persona I was in back then. So I would see her, and she had like really big hair and loads of makeup on all the time, and like, lots and lots of work done, and I've had a bit too, so I'm not against that, don't get me wrong. Again, this is not how I feel now. But I would see her walking around, and she would be talking into her phone, just like doing her stories in the middle of Westfield. And I'd be like, who the fuck does this bitch think she is? Like, oh my God, how embarrassing. Oh my God, like, oh, hilarious. Really bitchy stuff. But this was all internal. I wouldn't go talk about this to anyone, but I was obsessed with her. I would jump on her page and look at her and be like, oh my God, laughing at her, like making fun of her. And I always reflected on this. At the time, I didn't have the consciousness, but when I started learning about shadow work, I was like, I realized that this was one of my shadows. She was triggering me, and it was triggering because I kept coming back to it, I kept wanting to see her stuff. I was drawn to her for a reason. And it wasn't necessarily like she was pissing me off. It was more just like I couldn't not go back and make fun of her, that she was activating something in me. And what I realized was she was actually a positive projection. She was showing me something that I hadn't yet developed. This girl didn't give a fuck. She had so much confidence. She didn't care what anyone else thought of her. She was just doing her thing. And this was something that I was desperate to develop in myself, and she was reflecting back to me what I was lacking. I was lacking the confidence of being myself and completely blocking out what was going on around me and just doing whatever I wanted to do or being who I was. And it triggered me that she was doing that. And I couldn't do that yet because I was still so concerned about how I was being perceived. So it was really interesting. This girl who would never know that this was going on, I can't even remember her name if I'm honest, was one of my VS teachers, just a random girl in Bondi, Westfield. Yeah. And so that was a positive projection. So anything that we kind of really triggered by him, like he is like really, really organised, really rigid with stuff. Yeah. Like he's from the army, he's all very, very clean and everything like that. And I just always get like really triggered by not triggered, but really activated by how he would always try to control the space and always try and pick up after me. And I'd always feel really like, oh, why does he do that to me? Why is he constantly trying to control me? And then what I realised is there's this, like, he was also showing me how I was unconsciously trying to control the space as well by leaving my stuff around. Like I was doing things to try and stake some space, and he was just reflecting back to me exactly what I was doing. So he wasn't respecting my way of living, but then I wasn't respecting his way of living. So sometimes we see just the smallest things in other people that are actually pure reflections of exactly what we're doing. Yeah,
exactly. Wow, that is so cool. And I think like a lot of people will get like benefit from you giving me those examples as well. What we might do, I think to finish up, I always ask one question, but before I do that, where can my followers find you if they want to like learn more about what you do and like follow your profile?
Yeah, so Instagram is obviously the best way to get to me, and my handle is I am Ashleigh Boehm on Instagram. So always jump through there and you'll find the various links to my programs and my offerings, and feel free to shoot me a DM and ask a question. Always love interacting with people.
Yes, we'll pop all of the information that you have in the show notes as well.
Beautiful.
And the last question that I wanted to ask you today, Ashleigh, just to be mindful of your time, is what would be, and you can channel into this, you can like first answer that comes to your mind, but if you should listen to your heart and listen to that first answer, that what would be some advice that you believe the listeners on my podcast need to hear right now, what would that piece of advice be? It doesn't have to relate to what we've spoken about either.
Do you know what is really big for me is find your expanders and models of excellence. So find people in life who have the cheat codes for what you want. Like, that's been the biggest thing for me, is to find mentors who I really resonate with on a soul level, but also living the kind of life that I want to live, and who carry the same values as me, and really learn from them. Because we don't have these rites of passage anymore. We're so disconnected. Like, we used to come from tribes where we'd be mentored, where there'd be many people in our lives who were teaching us about life. And now we kind of just like go through a school system and then get thrown out there in the world, and we're trying to figure it out. And it's really confusing. So to have someone and to find those people in life who are just a couple of steps ahead of you, who you really feel a deep connection with, who embody the values that you embody, and be in their energy, learn from them. Like, just find those people who are doing that, and then you'll feel like you have an anchor point. You'll feel like you have some guidance. And that's been probably the biggest transformational thing for me, is to find those people in my life and to really get the support from them and learn from them, learn about life. So that's probably a massive one for me. Models of excellence and expanders, mentors.
I love that so much. And I definitely would agree with you and resonate deeply as well. So, well, thank you so much, Ashleigh. Pleasure. It's been an absolute amazing time with you here today. And like I said, it's a little bit surreal for me, because I'm like, oh my gosh, like when I first met you, and to be here right now, it's like so cool. And I'm really looking forward to seeing what you achieved like through 2023 and watching your journey. And now that we've connected, like, if we do another podcast later in the year, that would be epic.
Always love it.
We'll collaborate and see what happens.
Amazing.
Thanks guys for listening.
Thank you.
Thank you for being a part of the Generation Elevation community. If you enjoyed today's episode, make sure to leave a 5-star rating, written review, share, and tag me on Instagram at elise.riley. Until next time, keep loving, keep learning, and keep rising.